Chapter 1. Who am I? But hearing oftentimes the still, sad music of humanity. William Wordsworth. One of the classic questions asked throughout the history of humankind is, what is man? Or what is woman? Or in a more inclusive sense, what is a human being? The psalmist asked a similar question. He not only asked the question, but also provided an answer, saying that humans are a little lower than the angels. The Revised Standard Version of the Bible reads, a little less than God. Certainly, there are many different perspectives by which this question may be addressed. Philosophers, theologians, psychologists, anthropologists, sociologists, and many others have dealt with this question. They propose answers within the context of their own individual perspective. Blaise Pascal, a French philosopher, in Pensées, compared human beings to a reed so fragile that even a drop of water would destroy it. But, he added, there was a significant difference. In the case of human beings, they were aware that they were dying. Obviously, there are other characteristics which distinguish human beings, such as the use of reason, the capacity to weep and to laugh, and the gift of loving. The truth of the matter is, human beings are a mixture of pride and humanity, righteousness and evil, selfishness and unselfishness, sincerity and hypocrisy, optimism and pessimism, docility and stubbornness, idealism and realism, sinfulness and saintliness. Human beings are an enigma, a riddle. It is essential first to understand and then remake human beings in order to remake the world. Human beings have the capacity to lower their eyes to the mud and identify themselves with the mundane. On the other hand, they may also look up to the stars and identify themselves with what is eternal, and by doing so, be transformed and lifted up into becoming indeed a little less than God. In recent years, major emphasis has been given to the meaning of being fully human. To be fully human demands that we come to grips with who we are as human beings, our limitations and finitude, as well as our potential. We are incomplete and imperfect, and even in our better moments, we have clay feet. I remember the work of a sculptor found in one of the suburbs of Buenos Aires, Argentina. I do not recall the name of the artist, but I well remember the title of the sculpture, Lifting Anchors, Levantando Anclas. It is close to the ocean and appropriately so, as it represents the figure of a man who is making a tremendous effort to lift an anchor in order to set the ship free to sail out into the ocean. Not knowing whether there will be storms at sea, he ignores the inevitable dangers of the dark night, which could cause the ship to be destroyed. He lifts the anchor with faith. The significant thing about this particular sculpture is that the man is looking up to the stars, to God, as though trying to say that even though the future may be uncertain, he trusts in the providence of the Creator, who enables him to lift the anchor and set the ship free. It seems this analogy helps to describe who we are as human beings, that is, persons in bondage who need to be made free. What is a human being? Who am I? This is the basic question. It is important sooner or later to realize who we really are. Arthur Miller, American novelist and playwright, in his play Death of a Salesman, presents a phrase which explains the tragic situation of the salesman who committed suicide. He commented that the man had never known who he was. In contrast, Cervantes, in his great work Don Quixote, has the main character stating repeatedly and emphatically, "I know who I am." In recent years, Cuban refugees have arrived at the shores of Florida in small boats. Their stories are varied and tragic, but they all share one common strand: the desperate search for freedom. One of the most unforgettable pictures published in the newspapers was a UPI photograph of a 57-year-old Cuban refugee, Raul Nunez Pluma, who had promised relatives that he would literally crawl to the United States soil and into freedom. And indeed, he crawled down the dock after arriving on a refugee boat in Florida. To be a person, a human being, meant freedom at any cost or sacrifice. Out of his experience as a Cuban exile, Luis Aguale wrote a beautiful song entitled Cuando Salí de Cuba, When I Left Cuba. The words express the longing, not only for freedom, as in the case of the man who crawled into the United States, but also homesickness for his native land. When I left Cuba, I left my life. I left my love. When I left Cuba, I left my heart buried there. My heart beats and keeps on beating because my land gives it life. But the day will come when I will hold my heart in my hand again. I cannot die here, for I don't have my heart with me. It is waiting out there. It is waiting for my return. On the other hand, it is obvious that to be a human being is intrinsically related to one's native land. We can better understand others if we take seriously their native culture. Some experiences make us feel that life is too much of a burden, particularly when we encounter multiple problems at once. You may recall the Peanuts comic strip in which Charlie Brown complains to Lucy that everywhere he goes, trouble follows him, and it seems that everyone is trying to unload their burdens on him. Finally, Lucy tells Charlie Brown that what he needs is an unlisted life. It has been stated repeatedly that part of the problem in our time is that the church sometimes has been answering questions that no one is asking. We have had a tendency to give simplistic answers to complex questions. Sure, Jesus Christ is the answer, but should we not know how to verbalize and clarify what the question is? The question may have to do with pride or alienation or selfishness or uncertainty or sin. But it seems to me that, significant as the answer is, we need to spell out specifically the questions to which Jesus Christ is indeed the answer. It seems to me that uncertainty and ambiguity are part and parcel of our contemporary experience. This is an integral part of our humanness. Our finitude demands this kind of uncertainty, which sometimes we have refused to accept. To be a human being means to accept our human limitations and our finitude, and in that context, be able to receive the answer. One of the legacies Erich Fromm left in The Art of Loving is the affirmation that love is the only sane and satisfactory answer for the problem of human existence. Long before our contemporary interest in the simpler lifestyles, he was writing about this same issue, as well as about psychological and ecological disaster in our society. Furthermore, he wrote that one of the greatest needs of humankind is to find meaning and purpose in our existence, just as Viktor Frankl, a Swiss psychiatrist, has done in his well-known concept of logotherapy. There is a longing everywhere for the return to a simpler life. On the other hand, we seem to have a passion for complexity. We are all a little akin to Martha in the story where Jesus came for dinner. Martha spent the whole time in the kitchen with the pots and pans, troubled, as Jesus said, about many things. It is easy to let life become unnecessarily cumbered. I frequently think about all the things I could have discarded through the years. Many files, memos, papers, notes, clippings, and other memorabilia, which one saves, will never be needed. Strangely enough, when disposed of, they suddenly become indispensable. We can get the church so over-organized that we lose sight of the real purpose of its existence. Suppose one peruses the list of events going on in an average church for any given week. I cannot help but wonder just where on that schedule an individual who carried a heavy burden would stand a chance to be received and known and understood. Someone has raised the question in all of our activity: can priesting take place? Is there a women's society meeting to which a spiritually injured woman might go with the thought that there she perhaps would be heard? Is there a church school class more concerned with the pertinent question of a troubled student than with finishing the lesson of the day? We have developed subtle and elaborate ways of keeping one another at arm's length. The term fellowship, koinonia, once a strong and noble word, has been reduced to a meaningless platitude in many congregations. What is the meaning of our humanness, of our being, in the context of the community? True dialogue does not take place frequently enough. Most persons are really unknown. They are hesitant to disclose themselves totally for fear of being misunderstood or rejected. They hide behind a mask of cynicism, superficial humor, or just plain chatter. I recall hearing an admonition not to build walls, because when we do, we not only wall other people out, but we also wall ourselves in. A walled-in person is a tragic figure and could be said to be in a kind of hell. John Castile, in Spiritual Renewal Through Personal Groups, gives us this insightful thought and the real possibility of breaking out of the syndrome of isolation. The vitality of the group's life together depends on the freedom, honesty, and depth with which members come to share their questions, problems, insights, and faith with one another. Sharing may begin with the discussion of the ideas presented in a book or some current public event or a situation in the church or the community. But if sharing is to be genuinely vital and creative, it moves from these outer circles of interest towards the center, where members speak together of their own personal concerns, needs, experiences, and hungers. One of the most awful and miserable experiences of life is the feeling of rejection. It is almost impossible to describe this sensation unless you have experienced it. It is the experience which comes about when someone draws a circle and leaves you out. Rejection can be experienced in so many different ways. Cain, in the Old Testament, felt deeply rejected when God refused his offering. Genesis chapter 4, verse 5. We can understand how he must have felt. Perhaps we will never know why it happened, but the main point of this story is as relevant as today's newspaper. The result of the rejection was anger. Anger led Cain to kill his brother. He was condemned to be a wanderer on earth, bearing a sense of guilt. This story illustrates clearly what is happening today in all kinds of relationships. It embodies one of life's persistent concerns, rejection in relationships. Are we able to handle rejection? Do we attempt to be vindictive when someone has rejected us? Or do we accept the person in spite of the rejection? The choice is always ours. Difficult as it may be, one can decide to be intentional and forgiving until it becomes a lifestyle. It may or may not help the person who has rejected us, but unquestionably, we will be victorious over that situation. One of the arduous tasks of a Christian is dealing with the issue of self-love. I'm not talking about being selfish or about any other expression of self-centeredness. I'm talking about one of the basic teachings of Christian faith expressed in Jesus' words. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Matt chapter 22, verse 39. This is one of the most misunderstood teachings in the Scripture. How can we love ourselves properly? Well, it has to do with self-respect, a sense of identity, self-understanding, and a meaningful life that is consistent with our self-understanding. Many of the problems people have are related precisely to this issue. How can you love yourself when you feel that others hate you and reject you? Accepting ourselves as persons, and accepting that other persons, regardless of their differences, is the first step towards maturity and fulfillment and finding a climate where differences and uniqueness can be affirmed. Undoubtedly, psychological insight facilitates the process of searching and finding purpose and meaning in human existence. Self-understanding is one of the keys which unlocks the door to meaningful relationships with other persons. The insights of psychology do not provide the whole answer, but sound psychological principles, in partnership with the Christian faith, can be extremely helpful in resolving a number of problems in our understanding who we are. During a seminar on group dynamics, one of the activities in which the group participated was going outdoors on a beautiful first day of spring to try and identify ourselves with some object in nature. Following a brief period of time, we returned to share some of our learning. Someone shared that she had become a tree. She said, I wanted to give shade and comfort to weary persons, but I also felt the need for roots. I thought I must be solid, so that the whirlwinds around me will not uproot me. I shall stand. I shared my experience of identifying with the cloud. Mine was a small cloud on that beautiful spring day, surrounded by a splendid blue sky over Tennessee. I felt that I must be willing to move, as if impelled by the wind. I wanted to be a cloud, willing to move, but also to stop, sometimes briefly, and sometimes for a longer period of time, providing rest to some weary person who was under stress. At that point in my career, I was at a crossroad, an intersection in my life, so that this identification became a meaningful and relevant symbol of my own willingness to hear, to trust, and to obey, and to move as swiftly and effortlessly as the cloud. In trying to understand who we are, we have to recognize and affirm the dualism of human existence. and find in the dialect of the yes and the no that the secret of personal victory is to live in spite of the ambiguities of human existence. It is inevitable that we live in the midst of uncertainty, which is an integral part of our finitude. Being and becoming is a matter of continuing a journey, not expecting perfection in this earthly life. There is no perfection in marriage or in our profession or in anything else. The only alternative is to trust the one who created us and understands us and leads us through thorns and roses. As a wise elderly lady once said, "Life is strange, but beautiful, and I rejoice knowing that I can rest with confidence in a God who holds me in the hollow of his hand." T.S. Eliot wrote in 4 quartets, "There is only the fight to recover what has been lost, and found and lost again and again." As you wrestle with the issue of who you are, let me suggest that you focus your eyes upon God. Give thanks for all you are and all you have, and walk forward toward the future, unafraid, knowing that you are a child of God and of infinite value. God can enable you to be a person no longer troubled by fears and anxieties and past failures, no longer hemmed in with resentments and burdened by regrets, but free to discover who you really are and conscious of a purpose greater than your own life. Now, how can we be truly alive? How can we recover the zest of youth? How can we have the vigor, the vitality, and the strength regardless of negative circumstances? It is something which cannot come as a result of any self-generated effort, but on the other hand, it may possibly come about in one of these ways: a positive attitude toward the world, an emerging, growing trust in people, even when they may not be worthy of that trust, a willingness to risk in taking the initiative to develop new relationships which are mutually enriching, and a complete and unconditional trust in God and life and in the world created for us. Think about these thoughts and questions. Pope John Paul II once said that only in silence can we find true prayer. Spend some time in complete silence, preferably no less than 15 minutes. Look into your own life. What is really happening with you? What do you really need? What are you looking for? What are your goals and expectations? Is something keeping you from accomplishing your goals? What do you think it is? What about your self-understanding? Where are you coming from? Does your self-understanding give you a sense of personal worth? On the other hand, are you too hard on yourself? Do you experience constant self-condemnation? Do you feel loved by God, by others, by yourself? Are you finding ways in which you feel totally accepted by God, others, yourself? If not, why not? Have you experienced the meaning of unconditional love? When? Do you have a sense of identity? Are you happy about who you are? What about your relationships with other persons? Are they positive, constructive, and creative? Do you take the initiative to start a relationship with all types of personalities? What about your life as a Christian? Is it contagious? Do you share with others the joy of being a Christian? Pray aloud. Dear God, I am who I am by your grace. I long to continue to grow. Help me to climb toward higher and higher goals. In Jesus' name, amen. A thought for reflection. From Every Stormy Wind That Blows, by Hugh Stowell. From every stormy wind that blows, from every swelling tide, of woes. There is a calm, a sure retreat. 'Tis found beneath the mercy seat. There is a place where Jesus sheds the oil of gladness on our heads, a place than all besides, more sweet. It is the blood-bought mercy seat. There is a scene where spirits blend, where friends hold fellowship with friend. Though sundered far, by faith they meet around one common mercy seat. Ah, there on eagle's wings we soar, where sin and sense molest no more, and heaven comes down our souls to greet, and glory crowns the mercy seat.